multiple fraud charges.
Sam was just too important in the crypto community.
When someone says, I'm going to give $1 billion in the next 2 years, like that catches everybody's attention.
As time went on, their ideas got like weirder and weirder.
I don't think he even had almost a conception at some point that it was wrong or right. I think he just had the mentality that he has to win.
This committee will not stop until we uncover the full truth behind the collapse of FTX.
Sue, Mark.
Are you in? I'm in.
I'm in.
We're in.
Will this be the last of its kind? No. This is the nature of capitalism. Get over it.
This is Bloomberg News Now.
News when you want it at the touch of a button.
Another volatile day on Wall Street. We're seeing big moves.
All eyes on Capitol Hill as Democrats and Republicans prepare.
Today's job numbers casting doubt on the Fed's next move. Inflation remains front and center. And that's news when you want it with Bloomberg News Now. Get it 24/7 on the Bloomberg Business app, Bloomberg.com, and anywhere you get your podcasts.
Bloomberg News Now. Context changes everything.
Or other authorities.
Could face bigger challenges.
Listens next.
Fed was going to keep rain World Cup. This is a 3
as the economic picture
covering the intersections of Hollywood, Silicon Valley, and beyond.
From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
From the snowy streets of Des Moines, Iowa, to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. Alongside Joe Matthew, I'm Kaylee Lyons.
The race for the Republican nomination for president starts for real tonight. Iowans coming together in just under 3 hours to caucus, choose their preferred candidate.
Caucus goers braving sub-zero temperatures tonight and Arctic weather to have their voices heard. Former President Trump leads all polls by a commanding margin, while former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley has edged into second place in front of Florida Governor Ron DeSantis.
But we should know much more after tonight as New Hampshire looms on the horizon. But Kaylee, we've got a lot to learn before then.
Yeah.
Nice to see you here in sub-zero Des Moines. Great questions about the weather, which seems to be as big a story here as any presidential campaign.
Well, what will it mean for turnout? Remember, it is 7 o'clock Central on the dot that caucus goers need to be there in person in order to actually choose their candidate. And if there's ice on the roads and it is very cold outside, there is a big question as to whether they're going to feel as compelled to turn out, especially when former President Trump is leading by such a wide margin heading into this evening.
Some areas, we're here in Des Moines where there are many caucus sites, and we're going to be talking about that over the course of the evening here. In some of the outlying areas, though, Kaylee, you'll have one caucus site that might be quite a ways from your home. And some police departments are actually warning people from going out and driving long distances here in Iowa. So the question is, what would a low turnout mean for these campaigns? Who might benefit? Ron DeSantis thinks it's him, by the way. We heard from him a bit earlier.
Well, he thinks his ground game that he's built here in Iowa, of course, having visited all 99 counties, having all of these precinct captains ready to go in 1,600 different locations, he thinks that's what's going to make a difference for him. And he doesn't seem to want voters to pay too much attention to the polls. This is what he said this afternoon.
We have a great opportunity tonight to not let the media pick our candidate, not let the pundits pick our candidate, not like entrenched politicians in Washington, D.C. pick our candidate, but let's have the people pick our candidate. Let's have Iowans pick our candidate.
And with just 3 hours, as we mentioned to go, we begin our conversation with Bloomberg's Wendy Benjaminson and Christian Hall. Great to see both of you here in Des Moines as well. You've been talking to candidates, talking to voters, making the rounds. Wendy, this is it. The perspective is important here for folks who've been listening to us talk about polls for months on end. Great speculation and analysis actual voting begins tonight.
Yeah, it really, really begins. I mean, we feel like we've been covering this race for a year.
Well, we have.
And we have, exactly. And so it is sort of exciting to see the first votes come in and have the first caucus going. Sort of would be more fun if we were more uncertain about the outcome, but anything can happen in Iowa. And as Des Moines Register pollster Ann Seltzer was telling us earlier today, it's not only what people say now how they're going to vote, but the enthusiasm gap, as they call it. How many people are enthusiastic about their votes? And they have to be pretty enthusiastic to go out in this weather. So right now, Donald Trump does have the most enthusiasm among the three of them, Donald Trump, Nikki Haley, and Ron DeSantis. Ron DeSantis does have this excellent ground game, which can help because you have people really working to get you to the polls. He was even offering to have, not him, but have people shovel others' driveways to get out. Nikki Haley, who does need to do well to go on to New Hampshire, has the smallest enthusiasm among caucus goers.
Well, in that Des Moines Register poll you were referring to, Christian, 9% said they were enthusiastic about caucusing for her. For former President Trump, it was 49%. So for Nikki Haley's campaign, knowing that you've spent a lot of time covering her, you've spent a great deal of time here in Iowa, what's going to constitute a win for them?
Yeah.
Is number 3 satisfying for the Haley campaign?
You know, I think that's a really good question. The stakes are really high for, DeSantis and Nikki Haley. I think anything less than a big win for Donald Trump would come as a surprise. I'm going to be watching Nikki Haley and DeSantis. I think how they fight out this race, the outcome of this will be really big for them. The stakes are so high. I mean, for DeSantis, I think if he does not perform strongly tonight, it's going to be very difficult for him to make the argument to donors and voters alike. How is he going to continue? How is he going to make it past New Hampshire, where he's not polling very well? Yep. How is he going to make it to South Carolina? How can he make it to Super Tuesday? But I think for Nikki Haley, the question is, how well can she perform tonight? I think a second place win would be very good for her. It will give her the momentum that she needs in New Hampshire, where she's performing a little bit stronger. And I could see that her placing in second place tonight could make the argument that she has what it takes to compete in this race. So the stakes are very high for all of the candidates, but especially those who are fighting for second place.
Speaking to Donald Trump's chances of potentially winning this was Jim Jordan, the congressman chair of the Judiciary Committee, joined us at this table earlier to talk about it. Here he is.
I think he's going to win. I mean, I don't know what the margin is going to be. My guess is he'll win by greater than 12, but I think he's going to win tomorrow night. I think he's going to win in New Hampshire. I think he's going to win in South Carolina. I think he's going to be our nominee. And most importantly, I think he's going to be our next president.
So does the margin matter?
I don't think the margin matters. You got to win, but I mean, if it's big, all the better.
Does the margin matter to the man himself, though, if not to you?
Winning matters. I mean, I learned a long time ago, winning beats losing every single time. So the goal is to win. Whatever that margin is, I'm fine with it. But I do think he's going to win big. Who knows what the number is? I don't think the cold weather hurts his supporters. I think they're coming. I was at a rally today, and it was packed. And, I don't know what the other candidates are getting, but my guess is nothing close to what turning away people when it's 20 below zero. They came out, so it was a big crowd.
We had that conversation roughly around this time yesterday. So it's a game of expectations. As you were both discussing, Wendy, are we obsessing too much over this? The idea of whether Donald Trump gets over 50 or minus 50, is that going to matter after we leave Iowa?
Well, yes and yes. We are obsessing about it, and the political class is sort of the only ones who really obsess about this. But Donald Trump getting less than a solid majority, 51%, shows a slight softening in the support. It shows that there are Republicans who are interested in an alternative. And how much of the gap there is between his support and Nikki Haley or Ron DeSantis, as Christian said, sort of tells you what the race is going to be. And Nikki Haley needs a good showing so she can go to New Hampshire, where she's just behind Donald Trump and attracting a lot of independents and possibly some Democrats to cross over and vote for her in the primary. But Donald Trump needs to show, and he will say it no matter what the results are tonight, he will say he had a commanding lead. But if he doesn't, we'll all be watching to see if there is any, breaks in the armor there.
Yeah.
We all, to a certain extent, are kind of treating this like a three-person race. But here in Iowa, it very much is not. Vivek Ramaswamy has spent a great deal of time here, Christian. He actually contends he's done a double Grassley. He's gone to all 99 counties, not just once.
The double Grassley.
Could he surprise us tonight in any fashion?
Well, I think Iowa is always full of surprises, so he can absolutely do that. Is it likely? I'm not sure. Donald Trump, we've seen in the polling leading up to this day that he is the front runner in this race, right? So we'll see what happens. Iowa has a lot of surprises, but we'll see. He's
promising shock results tonight, by the way, so we'll see about that. We learned...
Be a shock.
Well, I guess that's right. $123 million. The final price tag, according to Ad Impact, on Republican ad spending campaigns and PACs so far in Iowa. That's a lot of money.
That's a lot of money.
What did they buy for themselves?
Well, we'll see in a few hours, right? But Vivek Ramaswamy, he's at 8% in Ann Seltzer's poll. I don't know that can suddenly translate into 50% in a few hours.
Yeah.
But it is good for the budgets of Iowa television.
Well, I suppose that's true.
It absolutely is. So, Christian, final thought here from you. Knowing New Hampshire is just 8 days from now, it's a week for tomorrow. Are there any indications from any of these campaigns that they will not be in New Hampshire with the rest of us come a week from now? Could anything end in Iowa here tonight?
Yeah, I was talking to a DeSantis staffer earlier, and I asked that same question. And they are saying that they have what it takes to not make it only through New Hampshire, but also to Super Tuesday, right? And I think the campaigns, they have to do that. They cannot say, I don't think we're going to make it,
Yeah.
Ask
Chris Christie.
Exactly. So we'll see what happens tonight.
Indeed we will. And of course, you'll both be covering it for us. Thank you so much for joining us. Our thanks to Bloomberg's Wendy Benjaminson and Christian Hall. And coming up next, we're going to talk with famed pollster Frank Luntz. He'll be here with us on set in Des Moines on this caucus day in Iowa. That's next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV.
London will stay a financial center. It will stay our EMEA hub. We'll just have a rebalancing onto the continent. And actually, the numbers of who has moved across aren't that big. So it's sort of in the 200 level. And if you think about 15,000 people, that's sort of not that material. And so I do think both will basically continue to grow and continue to be very relevant. What will change, though, and the big thing that's changing, is actually the risk-taking is what's going to move. And so we've historically had risk-taking in the UK. That risk-taking and the assets that go with it, not the people alone, but the assets that go with it, that's the next phase of what we're now moving into. And that will be a material change.
Your source for news and analysis covering the biggest challenges facing the UK government, economy, financial services, and markets.
Tax cuts should not be the priority. It's about a credible plan for growth over the next 2-3 years.
In this post-Brexit world, how do you see actually servicing your clients?
It was disruptive, and it's going to have implications to how capital raising works.
Now we're having the perfect storm in the UK.
Watch Francine Lacqua Thursdays at 9:30 a.m. only on Bloomberg. Context changes everything.
This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio, live from Des Moines, Iowa, where it is caucus night. Joe, the first real contest in this 2024 race for the Republican nomination. And we keep hearing Iowa always surprises us. Obviously, Iowa has not picked consistently the ultimate Republican nominee, but there is a feeling this time around that people know which way they think this is going to go, at least in terms of who claims victory tonight. And number 2 and 3 are the questions. It's just a question of whether or not that polling proves accurate when it has not before.
Well, that's absolutely right. I mean, we're going to have a make or break night likely for, I'm guessing, at least one campaign, if not a couple of them. You made the point earlier, this is really still a four-way race. The question is, will it still be by tomorrow?
Well, let's pose that question now to our guest and bring in Frank Ernst. He is a pollster and CEO of FIL Inc. He's here with us in Des Moines. Frank, very good to see you in a very cold Iowa.
It's impossible. I brought my students from Radley College in the UK, and they're desperate to go home. They have never felt the biting cold, and tonight it's going to be a record cold.
Yeah.
We know that 187,000 Republicans voted in the caucus back in 2016, so that's the benchmark now. Most people assume that the turnout's going to be down because of weather. I'm told that because there's so much interest in the caucus, it could actually hit 195,000.
Wow.
So we're going to be watching that turnout.
Amazing. That would say a lot about Iowa. The other thing they say about Iowa is that it picks corn and New Hampshire picks presidents. And I wonder how you see the importance of this contest, because when we wake up tomorrow, it's going to be all about Manchester.
Yes, so Iowa makes a statement, but New Hampshire makes a difference. And I don't believe that Iowa is reflective of the country.
Yeah.
It may be reflective of Republicans. The biggest difference between Iowa and New Hampshire among Republicans is that New Hampshire are economic conservatives and Iowa are social conservatives. So you have groups like the Family Leader, and they endorsed Governor Ron DeSantis. The question now is how many of them switched from Donald Trump, who they voted in 2016, to DeSantis in 2024. It appears like the DeSantis campaign has peaked. We don't see the momentum over the last, let's say, 72 hours. I know that the events of the other candidates, the Trump event you couldn't get into. It was just so jammed. And I'm very careful about making prognoses based on who shows up for campaign events. But that's what a caucus is. Who shows up in this weather to make their voice heard.
Well, to that point, I was at an event for Ron DeSantis last night. It was a pretty packed room. Obviously, he has invested a great deal in the ground game here in Iowa. The campaign essentially has bet the farm, if you will, on this first caucus state. Can he replicate that anywhere else? Are you seeing any indication that if there's enthusiasm for here in Iowa, that extends anywhere else? And then what is the fate of his campaign if he can't come in first in this state?
That's the question. I'm looking at polling right now in New Hampshire that has DeSantis in single digits. There's supposed to be a debate on Wednesday in New Hampshire, Thursday, and then another one on Saturday. And rumor has it that Nikki Haley is going to refuse to debate. So that's going to deny or make it impossible for DeSantis to be able to draw that direct one-on-one comparison. Now, I will say this. In the debate that they had here several nights ago, I've never seen those two candidates better. Haley and DeSantis. I'm thinking, how is Joe Biden going to stand up for this? I know that's a long time in the future, but both of them were powerful. Both of them were very strong in their points of view, and the campaign is getting negative, very negative.
Are you still of the mind that Joe Biden could beat Donald Trump, but not the others in the field then?
At this point, yes. You just summarized it perfectly. If the election were held today, I was held to account on this. And I said words I never dreamed I would say before. If the election were held today, I think Donald Trump would beat Joe Biden. But it's another 9 months from now.
Yeah.
But the fact is, the two weakest candidates in the field are Joe Biden and Donald Trump. Put up any other Democrat, and that person wins. Put up any other Republican, and that person wins. So it's my job as a pollster to be able to look not just at what's going to happen tonight or next week, but look 9 months down the road. And I'll give you three conclusions. Number one, the economy is still going to be important, but it's inflation, it's affordability that matters most. Number two is going to be turnout. Are young people going to participate like they did in 2016 and 2020 for the Democrats? And number three, is there a sleeper issue? Are we going to have an international conflict, or is abortion going to rise like it did in 2022? and swing the election towards the Democrats.
Well, the Supreme Court is going to have to make a decision on access to the abortion pill, mifepristone, so that very well could factor in here.
Yep. And by the way, access to the ballot.
Well,
and Donald Trump,
the 14th
whether or not
Amendment
he
question,
could be charged.
Surely.
It's amazing that we're supposed to be having an election for the 337 million Americans, but instead we're focused on the Supreme Court and the decisions that they make and the impact that they're going to have on the election system.
Yeah, not the branch of government we would necessarily think we'd be focusing on this year. To return to Nikki Haley, and Bloomberg hasn't independently verified that she will not be debating in New Hampshire next week, but New Hampshire does seem to be the state where it is thought that she actually could pull off something of a victory because of the independence that she potentially could claim here. What are you seeing from perhaps registered Democrats who are considering switching over, from independent voters? Is there really that support for her across the aisle? Could she see any of it showing up here in Iowa tonight, knowing they could change their registration up until this evening?
It's harder to do it in Iowa because it's still more of a partisan state. New Hampshire celebrates its independence, live free or die. And I see it as having a greater impact. The other issue is that Joe Biden is not on the ballot. Democrats are not engaged in that campaign up in New Hampshire, so there's a chance for independents to have their voices heard. I think New Hampshire is now too close to call. I never thought I'd say that. I do believe that tonight Donald Trump is going to have a very big victory here.
Too close to call between Trump and Nikki Haley.
That's correct.
Speak to us about the quality of polls. Our listeners and viewers, many of whom have discounted them after the past couple of cycles. The quality of the sample and the numbers that we're sharing with our audience. We've had surrogates from all the campaigns tell us they don't believe them. How about you?
They have to say that.
Yeah.
If I'm losing, if every poll shows me down by 30%.
But you're an expert. How do you look at it?
I take them with a grain of salt. I do a lot of focus groups to understand why people feel the way that they do. And that's been my focus in this campaign. Not to try to project who wins and loses, but to be able to explain why. And my greatest surprise, being ignored, being betrayed, being forgotten, still resonates after all this time, and that explains why Donald Trump is doing so well despite the felonies charges, despite being kicked off the ballot, all the chaos that goes along with him. Many Republicans are willing to put up with that chaos because they think he's being victimized and they think that he's being not just prosecuted but persecuted.
We'd love to hear your thoughts when we get out of Iowa.
If we get out of Iowa.
Here. Stay warm tonight and good luck traveling home.
Thank you.
That goes for all of us. Frank Luntz, we thank you. Coming up on Balance of Power, the election will have a dramatic effect on Wall Street. And coming up, we'll hear what three of the biggest names in finance have to say about potential Republican nominees for our Wall Street Votes segment. This is a special Balance of Power from Iowa on Bloomberg TV and radio.
Access the financial world on demand. Hear from leading economists, policymakers, and industry experts via live and on-demand webinars, only from Bloomberg. Start exploring to see what's moving the markets. Visit Bloomberg.com/webinars.
This is a special Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio, live from Des Moines, Iowa. Wall Street titans weigh in on the economics of the upcoming election and what the potential candidates' policies will mean for the investing community.
And starting us off, former Treasury Secretary and Wall Street Week contributor Larry Summers warns against going with Trump over concerns that Biden's policies are too interventionist. Take a listen.
My plea to my friends in the business community is, I understand some of your concerns about overly progressive, overly government interventionist policies of the Biden administration. In many cases, I share some of those concerns. But that is a very different thing than undercutting the entire framework within which the United States and its business community have operated for all of our lifetimes.
Let's hear more. Steve Ratner, Willett Advisors chairman and CEO, recalls the market's reaction to Donald Trump's victory in 2016 and what would be different this time around.
But you'll remember a lot of us kind of got this wrong. On election night, when it looked like Trump was going to win, initially the market crashed. Then people said, wait a minute, like 3 o'clock in the morning, they said, oh, wait a minute. The market soared up again, and it kind of took off from there, and then you had COVID and whatnot. This time may be more complicated because Trump's policies are not mainstream Republican orthodoxy. He's often the populist world with all these tariffs, which business hate. With shutting down immigration, which business hates. They need the workers. So I don't know that global Wall Street, and plus all of his anti-democratic authoritarian talk, I think it scares people. And so I'm not sure whether the Wall Street will react well to another Trump victory.
And we should note Steve Ratner is the chairman and CEO of Willett Advisors, which invests the personal and philanthropic assets of Michael Bloomberg. And to close us out, Glenn Hubbard, Columbia Business School professor of finance and economics and former Council of Economic Advisors, highlighting the similarities between Trump and Biden's business policies.
What strikes me in looking at least at President Biden and former President Trump's policies is less how different they are than how similar they are. So in terms of protectionism, in terms of a fondness for industrial policy, in terms of intervention in financial markets, the two men are more similar than they are different. There are clearly some differences and important ones between the two, but I think for business people, understanding that neither of these gentlemen is really embracing a growth and opportunity agenda is front and center.
That was Larry Summers, Steve Ratner, and Glenn Hubbard there for Wall Street Votes, weighing in on the economic policies of President Trump and former President Trump and President Biden. And Joe, what's so interesting is that, frankly, this could be who Wall Street is contending with.
Yes,
Presidents
right.
They have seen before.
Absolutely.
In both the Republican and Democratic nominees. So how does the market handicap that when you know some things, but maybe not everything about what a second term could bring for these individuals?
Interesting how the campaigns handicap that as well, as Donald Trump was famous for tweeting every time the market hit an all-time high, and Joe Biden was kind of uncomfortable doing that, even as the markets hit an all-time high.
Yeah, reluctant to tout stock prices, but
Uncle Joe.
All in on gas prices. Coming up, we'll have some of our interview with Iowa Senator Joni Ernst. That's next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio, live from Des Moines, Iowa.
I notice in a couple of drugstores, even in my area, which is not the poorest area in Washington, D.C., it's a nice upscale sort of area. When I want to get razor blades, you have to go to the front of the place and ask somebody to unlock it. Why are you locking up razor blades and other things that I might want to buy?
Yes. So, this is a national problem. And, this isn't, random theft. This is organized crime. And, state legislation has put guidelines on, how much the theft that you can steal before you're convicted. So it's a $1,000 limit. But we have been partnering with other retailers and sharing our camera feed. I know some of our partners here from Walmart are here, but we're all part of an organization that's coming together that says if we can put our camera feed together and tell that person has been in our store and their store, and the numbers are higher than 1,000. So we've been able to impact these theft rings most recently.
What are the things that are unlocking key the most? What are people trying to steal the most, other than razor blades? I guess?
I will tell you, it started at razor blades because that's such a high-ticket item, but, it's a lot of cosmetics, but really what happens is that they take advantage of what I would call the elbow move, and they just come in and swipe a counter. And so it's just a matter of categories now.
Always on the heartbeat of the tech
spread across global markets.
The real-time data aspect is going to be important.
We're going to bring you expert analysis on that. Sure.
Don't miss Bloomberg's interview with the
This is a special Balance of Power from Des Moines on Bloomberg TV and radio. Thanks for joining us. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lyons. It was a big deal, Kaylee, when Governor Kim Reynolds made an endorsement in this race, breaking the so-called Grassley rule in which, Iowans would kind of let caucus goers figure things out and not take a stand. And that remains the case for the two senators not weighing into this race yet.
Yes, including Grassley himself as
Grassley,
well.
of course, and
as well as Joni Ernst. And it is interesting knowing that Kim Reynolds is an incredibly popular governor here in Iowa, and there is a question of the political capital she may have lost as the result of the endorsement of Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. Should he not, in fact, win here because she did go out and decide to endorse him, even when other prominent Iowans were not.
Well, after what we just heard from Frank Luntz, you would think so. But the DeSantis campaign maintains that we're going to be surprised by the effectiveness of its ground operation tonight. We're just going to have to find out together.
Yep, we're going to find out and ultimately find out who wins, gets second and third, and whether or not maybe whoever wins gets the endorsement eventually.
Well, that's right.
Senator Ernst.
That's what follows, exactly. We spent some time earlier today, sat down, in fact, with the aforementioned Senator Joni Ernst, talk about caucus taking place in her home state. Here's what she had to say.
What we'll do here in Iowa is winnow down that field, and of course they'll go on to New Hampshire after we finish tonight. But I do think we've got incredible candidates that are out there, and if you look at Joe Biden's approval rating, lowest ever. I even hear Democrats out there that are asking us about the Republican candidates because they just don't want to see a Joe Biden second term.
Will you commit to endorsing whoever it is they choose, whoever they place first in this race?
I think it's incredibly important that we do not see President Joe Biden in the White House. And so I anticipate as we move through the nomination cycle that we have a great candidate, and then I will work very hard to make sure that Joe Biden is not in the White House.
Well, we'd love the insider's view here as we all prepare to watch this unfold tonight. The local view on what to watch. We're told that this race, at least the race for second, will be decided in the suburbs. Is that true? And what counties and communities are you watching tonight?
Well, I do think the suburbs really do matter in this contest. I think they're incredibly important, and the message that will resonate with those PTA moms, even working moms that are out there, I think it is important that we reach out to those voters. We saw a lot of those voters that have gone more to the left, and so we want to bring them back into the fold, but also in our rural areas, the areas that I am from. You know, who is that candidate that will reach out, touch that ag community, those farmers, make sure they understand that liquid fuels are still viable in the future. We are very strong in ethanol and biofuels here in the state of Iowa. Yeah. Very important issue for us.
Do you have any qualms whatsoever about the idea of a second Trump presidency, especially knowing the great geopolitical challenges the U.S. is facing on many fronts and his more isolationist bent, the idea that perhaps he could pull out of NATO when there is actually conflict right on the brink of NATO countries?
Well, that's where I think that as members of Congress, we should have great influence on whoever that next president is, and making sure they understand how important it is that we maintain our friendships around the world. And I believe in America first as well, but never America alone. We have got great friends and allies all around this globe. We should be supporting our friends and allies because they are doing a lion's share of the work on their own. So I do believe in supporting globally where it makes sense. That doesn't mean engaging our young men and women all the time in military action. No, it means we should be working with partners and leveraging the soft power that we have around the globe. But that means we have to maintain friendships. So I would encourage President Trump, if he goes into a second presidency, he needs to maintain those friendships.
You're heading back to Washington after the caucus to deal with some pretty important stuff, trying to avoid a government shutdown that would begin on Friday, and also somehow manage this border deal that's been in the works in your chamber. We're hearing from House Republicans that it's dead on arrival, that the work that Jim Lankford and his colleagues have done does not meet the grade. Are you getting frustrated with the reaction from next door?
Well, I am frustrated with outside organizations that before a bill is even written say don't support it. Because I do think that Senator James Lankford, he is an incredibly serious legislator. He is also a very conservative legislator. So as I have looked through the proposal, as I have actually asked James those questions, he is very serious about this. And his proposal is a serious proposal. So when he brings it in front of our conference, as he's discussing it with our House members, I hope they keep an open mind and make up their own mind. What I would remind, just as I did the members of my own conference in the Senate, is that take a look at all of those wonderful border and immigration bills that we passed during the Trump administration. Remember all of those great bills, you know, the ones that we had when Donald Trump was in the White House, when we had the majority in the House and the Senate, and a member of our conference said, we didn't have any. And I said,
yeah, which bills were those? Okay.
Exactly. This is an incredible opportunity that James Lankford is working on that we can present to the American people to actually do something and force the Democrats to accept.
Doesn't that mean you have to act, though, before a potential Trump presidency? Is that not what you're saying?
Yes, and I think it needs to be like right now, because on day one, whether it is a Donald Trump presidency, a Nikki Haley presidency, a Ron DeSantis, I don't care. Whoever we have in the White House come next January, they will have the tools necessary on day one to have much better border protection and policy than we do today. This is a disaster on our southern border. This is the #2 issue with Iowa voters. Economy is first, border is second. We've got to do something.
And finally, just in the last 24 hours, we've come to understand there is a deal on a continuing resolution, once again laddered, to keep funding the government to 2 dates in early March. Is that adequate time when nothing yet has proved enough time to reconcile what the House of Representatives and this Senate wants? Are we going to see this appropriations process finished by March?
I can't believe we're in this position because all of the appropriations bills have passed through the Senate Appropriations Committee on a bipartisan basis, Republicans and Democrats supporting, and yet Chuck Schumer will not move any of these bills on the floor of the Senate. This is outrageous. We have had all of this time since before the Christmas break to get appropriations bills done. But what did Chuck Schumer do? Again, bills are waiting to be taken up on the floor of the Senate. He did nothing, absolutely nothing. So here we are once again looking at a continuing resolution. So what I would ask of our leadership, get the bills across the floor. We're ready to vote on them. Bring them up. It's hard to vote on them when Chuck Schumer won't move on them.
That was our interview earlier today with Iowa Senator Joni Ernst here in Des Moines. And so interesting, Joe, to hear her there, although she has not endorsed Nikki Haley or any other candidate, to tell us that she gravitates towards Nikki Haley's foreign policies. I just wonder for Iowans as they head to caucus this evening, how much foreign policy really is front of mind when what we continually hear is the economy and the border, which we also were discussing with the senator.
Well, that's true. And to the extent that the border collides with our policy to support Ukraine and our ally Israel, it's kind of hard to remove the two to a certain extent. But indeed, it's going to be the economy first, domestic policy second, that likely make up minds in Iowa today. Fascinating, we didn't get an endorsement. She said she's made up her mind.
Yep. But it's private.
We're not quite sure where she's going with this. Seemed to be very fond of Nikki Haley. You saw her introduce Ron DeSantis last night, though.
Yes, but she also
spreading it around.
Introduced Nikki Haley at an event prior to that. So yes, certainly spreading the wealth around Iowa. Now coming up, we'll continue to count down to the Iowa Caucus kickoff. We'll be joined next by our political panel, Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano. This is Balance of Power, live from Iowa on both Bloomberg TV and radio.
Regional sports networks. There's a lot of, it's a business that seems to be collapsing. Leagues have sort of toyed around with, should we do something ourselves? Some teams are doing like local TV and streaming. How do you see that shaking out?
So I don't think I'm right on this, but my instincts keep telling me this is what's going to happen. Because if you remember the WWE, they launched their own network that had their own content and had their own pay-per-views. And it was kind of a smart, bold, ahead of its time move. And then they pivoted at the perfect time and they sold their content to, what was it, Peacock?
Yeah.
And that was really smart too because they were able to leverage that number as high as possible. So they always zagged where the money was when the opportunity was. I think the opportunity for the NBA with the local teams would be to own all that themselves.
This is a special Balance of Power live from Iowa on Bloomberg Television and radio. We are just about, now 2 hours and 15 minutes from the start of caucusing here in Iowa, the first real contest for the Republican nomination in 2024.
People are charging up their heated gloves like yours.
Myself,
They're pouring soup. They're saying, are we really going to do this? And campaigns are probably filling vans with supporters to get them to caucus sites.
Yep, we'll drive you. Just get in the car and
Exactly.
let's go. The question is, how many people are going to say, okay, yeah, I'll do that?
That's the question tonight.
Well, we have at least two people who have braved the cold weather to be here with us this evening. Joining us now is our political panel, Rick Davis, partner at Stone Court Capital, and Jeannie Shanzano, political science professor at Iona University. So, Rick, just to begin with you, because you've been through a few cycles here in Iowa, we know that Iowa does have the power to surprise. You look at Ted Cruz and Rick Santorum in cycles past. Could this be the least surprising Iowa caucus we've had in the modern era?
Yeah, I think that's actually a really good point, Kelly. I mean, everyone knows who's going to win tonight. The question is Donald Trump going to get over 50% or below 50%? But the ultimate outcome is already predetermined, right? There's absolutely no way that anybody's going to catch him and beat him tonight. Now, there's all kinds of sub-rosa strategies around who's going to come in second.
Yes.
We have a very close Des Moines Register poll that shows it basically within the margin of error, but the first time that Ron DeSantis shows up in third place, not second place, which he's occupied since he got in the race. And so, yeah, there's some really interesting narratives that are happening. But as far as kind of the usual mystery of who's going to win the Iowa caucus, or the mistake of all of us saying it's going to be somebody else and then Huckabee or Santorum or one of these guys surprises us, makes us all look bad, that's not going to happen tonight. We're not going to look bad at all.
Well, so from what I'm hearing from everybody is, and correct me if I'm wrong here, pull me back from the ledge, Jeannie, maybe the results tonight aren't going to matter for a lot anyway. Nikki Haley's in for New Hampshire. Ron DeSantis says he's going to Super Tuesday. Vivek Ramaswamy, not so sure. Donald Trump is Donald Trump. So we're going to, in another week, be in New Hampshire having the same conversation, aren't we?
Yeah, I mean, I do think, though, that Iowa does matter. I mean, listen, we're all talking before they've even started voting, and I agree with Rick. We do know who's going to win, but we don't know by how much. We have, of course, the weather factor. It could impact turnout. And, you know, for somebody like Nikki Haley, as we look at that last, the Des Moines Register poll, her enthusiasm numbers were very, very disappointing. And she's getting so much support from independents and Democrats that could hold her in good stead in New Hampshire. But imagine if that poll is wrong and Ron DeSantis does indeed come through. He spent an awful lot of money, all the 99 counties, the super PAC. I mean, he is organized. So I do think there are narratives coming out here that are going to be important. And we know, I mean, to your point, Kaylee, Donald Trump reportedly has been on the phone all day trying to make sure that those precinct captains get out there and get those cars warmed up and drive people, because they know that they have got to get as close to 50 or over if they get the narrative, to get the narrative out of here that they want.
Okay, well, so let's talk about Ron DeSantis, Rick, because to Jeannie's point, we've made it already several times on this program. They've invested in the ground game. That's what they say. They spent a lot of time in Iowa. They visited all 99 counties. Is there a path for Ron DeSantis to win the nomination that does not include winning Iowa, knowing, as Jeannie is pointing out, Nikki Haley looks like the closest to being able to top Trump in New Hampshire, and that's the next contest?
Yeah, I think actually some of the polling has given him a window, right? Up until now, he was supposed to come into second, but when the polls started coming out showing Nikki Haley above him, what did he do this week when he hit the ground here? I'm the underdog.
Yeah, leaning into it. Yeah.
I mean, he just immediately became, you know, the insurgent. And now he's got an insurgent campaign. Now, if that insurgent campaign does, in fact, use all these techniques and money that he spent that Jeannie was talking about, and he does come in second, wow, do you take that to New Hampshire and say, I'm fighting as the underdog, and I'm the underdog here too? And guess what? What if he has a better showing than anybody expected in New Hampshire? He shows up in South Carolina as the underdog. Now, I don't know how many times you can come in second and third and still think you're going to win. That's not the math you want. But he's definitely the kind of guy who wants to hang in there as long as he can. And so maybe, you know, actually having a bad month has breathed new life into his campaign.
Isn't that something? So he's going to be fighting for rural areas with Donald Trump. Nikki Haley has really invested time in the suburbs, college-educated voters. What's that strategy going to mean for your focus tonight? Where are you looking for early indications on a result?
Yeah, I think for Ron DeSantis, Sioux County, the northern, western 3 counties are the hotbed of social conservatism, right? Christian conservatives. And he has to plug into that population in order to energize his base. That's who he has been trying to build a coalition around, even though Donald Trump has split that for the first time in caucus history. Usually it's a very homogeneous set of voters, but he's got to show up well there. And of course, exactly what you said, Nikki Haley has to score sort of the classic Rubio, right, which is college towns. So Des Moines, Story County, Jackson County, Johnson, all the places basically that you have universities which are more moderate and more, I would say, more people live in those towns. That's got to be her base. That's where she's got to perform well. The real question is, can Donald Trump hold them all down to the point where even though they're competing, they're not winning counties? Can Donald Trump actually run the gamut and win all 99 counties if he's hovering 50%?
Well, that is certainly a high watermark when it seems that the bar already has been set incredibly high, which is why we're talking about 50% plus and whether or not that's disappointing. There also is the consideration that these people he's competing against haven't really wanted to go after him that hard to this point. And this is actually something that Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida, was asked about at a campaign event a few of us attended last night, and this was his response.
This is such a misnomer that somehow I have not held them accountable. I've been doing this for months and months. It's just what people want to cover or not cover. I mean, I can say, his failure to deliver on these promises, that is just not something that any conservative media wants to talk about.
To what extent is that actually true, Jeannie? And not just of Ron DeSantis, but of Nikki Haley as well, who just recently has added the chaos of President Trump, as she calls it, to her vocabulary.
Yeah, I mean, they like to blame the media, conservative and otherwise, but the reality is there was a small window when Donald Trump was vulnerable. That was post-January 6th through to his tremendous losses in the midterm election. But once he was indicted, which is hard for all of us to believe, but once he was indicted, his numbers started to creep up, and you had Ron DeSantis out on the trail and his numbers going in exactly the opposite direction. And the biggest group I'm watching tonight in terms of a demographic, college educated, because that is where Donald Trump is picked up. And it is, stunning for people to imagine. He, of course, owns the not college educated Republicans, but his numbers are skyrocketing among the college educated. They don't see the reason, quite frankly, to have a mini-me. They have the real thing. They have the Coke. Why get the Coke extra with Ron DeSantis? And many of the focus group Republicans said, listen, he should have waited. And of course, it's easier said than done, but they feel like they have the authentic thing. Why go to second best?
Doesn't that go for Vivek Ramaswamy as well? He said Donald Trump's the greatest president of his lifetime. Then why would you run against him when he's still available?
Yeah, and he continued to say that after Donald Trump has been slaughtering him for 72 hours.
So is he getting concerned about Vivek, or he just wants that 5% or whatever he's...
Yeah, and Vivek in 8% in the last Des Moines poll. So I think Donald Trump, to get over this 50 that Rick was talking about, he's like, I got to get rid of this guy. Let's get those people over to my side. And of course, they are natural Trump supporters.
Wow.
And Rick, just final question to you. I know you suggested that Nikki Haley, because of her strength in New Hampshire, maybe this is a bit less important. But realistically, if it were a third place that's close to DeSantis versus a third place potentially significantly behind, does that momentum completely evaporate? How do you salvage it if you can't get second in Iowa?
Yeah, she made a decision probably about 2 months ago that she was going to play in Iowa, right? I mean, like if she'd have just sort of said, hey, Iowa, you do your thing, I'll do mine, I'll go to New Hampshire, and you guys work it out here because no one's going to beat Donald Trump anyway. I think that could have been an actual pretty interesting strategy. That is, of course, what we did with John McCain twice here in Iowa. That's why I'm indoors and not, getting attacked by the Iowa Republican Party right now. But the reality is her bid is in New Hampshire. Tomorrow morning when we get up, the Iowa caucuses will be over, there'll be a winner, and everything starts fresh. Now, she's already got momentum. Her numbers have been increasing in virtually every state where there's a campaign right now. And so it's not likely to bust that bubble right now. And in New Hampshire, they just can't wait for these candidates to spend the same amount of time, in New Hampshire that they've been spending in Iowa this week. So I think that the outcome is less important to her. Obviously, if she, comes out ahead of DeSantis, her campaign, #1 talking point, DeSantis should get out. Even though he's sitting on Trump votes in New Hampshire that otherwise would go to Trump if he got out of the election. So it's a really interesting dynamic as you pivot from tomorrow, Iowa to New Hampshire politics.
We're just about an hour away from the start of caucusing, and we've got Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano with us for the duration with special coverage to follow later on tonight. Rick and Jeannie, we thank you. As always, coming up, more coverage of the Iowa caucuses and the 2024 presidential election on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
Do you think there's much oil to be found in the lower 48 at this point, or even in, let's say, Alaska as well? Or mostly we know where all the oil is, and there's no more big Permian Basin kind of deposits anywhere?
People have said that over time, and then we've always been surprised. And so the U.S. has been explored more than any other place in the world. I think the industry has a good idea, but technology allows you sometimes to recover things that you haven't been able to before. That's the story of shale. The other one that continues to be a positive story is deepwater Gulf of Mexico, where we'll go out and drill in a mile or more of water depth and then go down several more miles and find large fields. And the Gulf of Mexico is still relatively underexplored compared to the onshore. So I think there's still room for more discoveries.
This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio, live from Des Moines, Iowa, where the caucuses are set to kick off just 2 hours from now.
And at 8 p.m. Eastern, we hope you'll join us as we'll hear from representatives from the Trump campaign and the DeSantis campaign as well. We had some great conversations, Joe, with even a former candidate, Governor Doug Burgum, who decided to endorse Trump here in Iowa just days ago.
We'll have real-time results, the numbers throughout the evening, and updates from election headquarters. We thank you for joining us on Balance of Power from Des Moines on Bloomberg TV and radio. Be back here in 2 hours on Bloomberg.
like to kick off with a very simple question. Has the whole Brexit process been messier, less messy, or as messy as you expected way back in 2016?
Was it as messy as we thought it would be? Probably was, and I tell you why, because of the fundamental mismatch